Howdy everyone, and welcome to the Serial Geek TV YouTube channel. My name is James Eatock, and today I'm going to showcase something that quite possibly many of you may never have seen before in relation to one of the best cartoons of the 1980s, Dungeons and Dragons. I've talked about Dungeons and Dragons on this channel before. It's a show that has so much heart, a show that is looked upon incredibly fondly by so many people all these decades later. One of the most remarkable things about the show is that we often collectively think of it as a continuing saga, one episode leading into the next. The truth is, when you look at the series, it's incredibly episodic in structure, with the status quo being restored by the end of every episode without fail. However, such was the strength of the writing on this show that it never truly felt like we were dealing with the villain of the week, mostly because Venger was usually in some way involved. But also I think one of the show's most captivating aspects was how episodes often seemed to start mid-story. Just take a look at these examples.
Quick, grab it! Can't you run any faster? It's gaining on us!
If my legs go any faster, they'll run right out from under me.
Help!
Look out, Sid! Hurry!
Scatter!
But it wasn't just the way in which the stories were structured. That core cast of wonderfully fleshed out and defined characters, each of them had a distinct personality, and each are given more than one episode to shine when the spotlight is placed firmly upon them. And because we root for these fantastic characters, hoping that they will manage to escape the realm and get back home, that continued support is what I believe makes it feel like a continuing story, with one episode leading into the next. And talking about that wonderful cast of characters, where would it be without Dungeon Master? The diminutive being was described by Mark Evanier in the series Bible as a cross between Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda, something that I believe the writers of this show followed to a T. During the earliest days of my time on the internet, we're talking late 1995, I remember seeing on message boards people conversing about Dungeon Master possibly not being all that he seemed, manipulating the journey of the children in order to serve a greater evil. Now, it's easy to think that those kind of dark musings about a cartoon from the 1980s is just your typical example of adults looking for particular meanings in cartoons to suit their own narrative. However, even in the Dungeons and Dragons series Bible, Mark Evanier states that in relation to Dungeon Master, he's on our hero's side, before adding in brackets, so he says. So even those working on the show were somewhat leaning into the idea that Dungeon Master was not all that he seemed. Me, I like to believe that he was the lovely little fellow voiced to utter perfection by Sidney Miller, who would aid the children in their quest and continually prove to be a source of great frustration for Eric. Actually, let me read to you Dungeon Master's profile from the Dungeons and Dragons series Bible, because it is fascinating and demonstrates how series Bibles should be written. Cross Obi-Wan Kenobi with Yoda and you have the weird being that serves as guide of this weird land. Some guide. He's only sometimes there when they need him, and most of the time he leaves them completely alone to stumble and venture all over the terrain. The Dungeon Master knows all about this land, so he says, and he's on our hero's side, so he says, but he has this maddening way of appearing, telling them something they need to know, and then vanishing before they fully understand it. He rushes about, always seeming to be in a hurry, and he'll tell them some vital, important fact about the next leg of their journey, or about what they'll encounter over the next hill. Then he'll be gone, and they'll be left to wonder just what he meant by what he said. Eventually, of course, they'll find out. Everything the Dungeon Master says has a purpose, even if it takes until the end of the episode to figure out what. But he speaks in ciphers and puzzles, and he is constantly leaving them to figure things out for themselves. He does not just appear out of thin air, or maybe he does. No one ever sees him appear, and no one ever sees him go. For our purposes, he will just suddenly be in a shot, and the kids will look down, do a gang double take, and wonder where did he come from. Or sometimes they'll open up a door, and there he is. He can be anywhere or nowhere, with neither rhyme nor even reason. He doesn't just vanish into thin air, or maybe he does. The kids will be distracted by something, and when they look back, no Dungeon Master. Gone, just like that. Or he'll lead them into a room. When they get inside, he's nowhere to be seen. Somehow, he evaporated in mid-threshold. How he appears and disappears is but one of the mysteries of the Dungeon Master. The kids feel that he knows all the secrets, including the all-important one as to how they can finally get home. Why doesn't he just tell them these things? Why does he make them go through one dangerous situation after another when he, obviously, could tell them how to avoid these things? Eric especially gets exasperated at the Dungeon Master's cryptic ways, but they have no answers. All they know is that he is wise, that he seems to be on their side, that following his advice always turns out in the end, although it may get very, very hairy along the way, that everything he says has a meaning if you can figure it out, and, above all, that he is the dread enemy of the evil Venger. Perhaps they have even been brought here specifically to combat Venger. Like the kids, we see little of the Dungeon Master. He pops up from time to time in the oddest places to offer advice, though he never actually solves their problems. In fact, he sometimes seems to complicate matters. In the end though, they understand what he meant, though not always why he didn't just come out and tell them. This odd little man is one of the greatest mysteries in a land that is all mysteries. One of the things I've always appreciated in relation to the way Dungeon Master is written is that when speaking directly to one of the children in a one-on-one scenario, he approaches each of them differently. With Hank, you get the impression that Dungeon Master treats him almost like an equal. With Bobby, there's a teacher-like aspect to Dungeon Master's delivery, and without a doubt, when speaking to Eric, Dungeon Master loves to wind him up, though he would never admit to such a thing. Most notably, Dungeon Master visually adheres to the old saying that great things come in small packages. This diminutive man is one of the most powerful individuals in all of the realm, and yet we only ever get a glimpse at his wondrous powers. Gazing upon Dungeon Master for the first time, one would think that his height would be a disadvantage. If anything, it is quite the opposite, as his opponents often underestimate him. But visually, it wasn't always going to be this way for Dungeon Master. And here is where this particular video takes a rather interesting twist, because we nearly had a very different, and I mean very different, Dungeon Master. As I've mentioned before on this channel, in the promotional images for Dungeons and Dragons, Presto originally sported a very different costume. These illustrations were some of the earliest published for the series, and thus nothing was truly set in stone. You'll also notice that Sheila wore arm-length gloves that matched her boots, and Eric was often seen with, one would assume, his steed. Now, notable by his absence was Dungeon Master. In fact, he doesn't seem to appear on any of the earliest promotional pieces. Heck, even on the fantastic Dungeons and Dragons promotional poster, illustrated by Bill Sienkiewicz, that sits behind me, Dungeon Master does not appear. Venger appears, even Uni appears. Now, there is a reason for Dungeon Master's absence, and it's thanks to former storyboard artist at Marvel Productions, Larry Houston, that I know why. I've known Larry Houston for many years now and even had the pleasure of visiting his house and seeing his original Jack Kirby artwork. I know, right? Now, you've heard me talk about and praise Bob Klein on this channel numerous times before. For those that don't know, Bob Klein was one of the most important artists that contributed to the Dungeons and Dragons series. His storyboards are some of the most beautiful ever seen, and it's no secret that many storyboard artists in the industry were fans of his work too, and thus his boards were Xeroxed by his fellow artists just so that they could marvel over his beautiful renderings. Seriously, people at other studios would seek out his boards. Turns out that Larry Houston had quite a few Bob Klein storyboard copies himself. One particular thing that caught my eye was the storyboard for The Night of No Tomorrow. Now, you may have seen these storyboards before. They've done the rounds over the years. Lovely to look at, right? Well, here's something rather special that you may not have seen before. It appears that there was an earlier draft, given that this was the very first episode, of these storyboards by Bob Klein. And one of the first things you'll notice is Presto, as he is wearing the costume seen on those previously mentioned promotional images. The fact that this character design appeared in these draft storyboards indicates that for a goodly while, this version of Presto, impressive collar and all, was going to be the one that appeared on screen. And, much like the promotional images, Sheila sports those arm-length gloves. Now, we can sit here and marvel all day at these storyboards, but wait a minute. Who is this fellow? He doesn't show up in The Night of No Tomorrow. He's certainly very eye-catching, but who could it be? No, your eyes do not deceive you. This was an earlier version of Dungeon Master. Yes, Dungeon Master, a 6-foot tall muscle-bound gentleman that towers over all of the other cast members. As you can imagine, when I saw these storyboards in Larry Houston's collection, I just had to have them, because I believe they reveal why Dungeon Master fails to appear in any of the early promotional work. Simply put, his character design was far from being finalised. I'm not sure at what stage Dungeon Master's design was altered, but it must have been rather late in pre-production. Thus, for a time, this powerful looking character, who would not look out of place in an episode of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, was the Dungeon Master. The funny thing is, the character dynamics change in certain cases. For example, can you imagine Eric losing his cool with this Dungeon Master? It really wouldn't work visually. We even see in the boards that when Dungeon Master replies to Eric in this panel, Eric takes a step back from this imposing figure. On a bigger scale, it also changes the perception of the character. This Dungeon Master already looks powerful, there's nothing to hide. He looks like the most powerful being in the realm, whereas this guy, the diminutive Dungeon Master, not so much. I must say that as interesting as this Dungeon Master is, I'm thankful for the changes that were made. So there you have it, the original Dungeon Master. Let's just for a second call upon our good pal Dusan Mitrovic to see what this version of Dungeon Master would have looked like on screen. Interesting. And that's it for this video. Thank you for watching. Please be sure to like, comment, share and subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next one.